Hey there, I'm Brian Goulet of GouletPens.com, and I am very, very happy to be showing you today the Visconti Homo Sapiens. This is considered to be kind of a holy grail pen for a lot of fountain pen enthusiasts. It's definitely one that I've had my eye on for a number of years, and for me personally, Visconti was kind of a holy grail brand, if you will, for us to be able to carry at Goulet. So I'm very thrilled to be an authorized Visconti retailer, and also to be able to offer to you this rather incredible pen. Visconti was established in 1988 by Dante Del Vecchio, who is a very innovative pen designer. Visconti's pens really do some really interesting things, and I think that this pen in particular shows that very much because it's actually made of volcano. It's the only pen in the world that I know that's actually made of volcanic rock. So I'll talk more about that in a minute, but first I want to talk to you about some of the packaging. So the way that this pen comes packaged is in this nice Visconti box, very attractive, very large size. This is a larger box than what you see with some of the other Visconti pens like the Rembrandt or maybe the Van Gogh. Very nice. It's a faux leather. They call it leatherette, but it's got a nice debossed imprint there with the Visconti logo. It looks really nice. Overall, the box is a good size, and it has kind of this oval rounded shape to it, even though it's square. I don't know how to explain that. It actually has this tray down in the bottom that you can slide out that shows you this little booklet that is pretty much a marketing piece, but it shows you a lot of really other gorgeous pens and some little steps in their manufacturing. It talks about their the villa that they have. It's a 15th century villa that Visconti actually manufactures these pens. So you can just tell there's a lot of kind of artistry that's put into it, and it talks a little bit about that. So it can just make you want to have even more pens, like you need that at this point, right? And then you open up the box. It splits open like this. It's got spring-loaded top here. It's got a Visconti logo in the top here that I think looks very nice as well. And then the pen just kind of floats on this little like pillow top here. And it has this thing as well. And this is actually a polishing cloth that comes only on the bronze finish. And I'll talk more about that in a second, but that does come with this particular pen. And the pen comes wrapped up in this plastic like so. And then you pull the pen out of here, and it has this little piece of paper that is kind of tucked underneath the clip that says Palladium Nib 23 karat Dream Touch, and that is talking about the nib. Unlike some other pen companies, they actually don't use a gold nib on here. It is 23 karat Palladium, which is very similar to a gold feel. It's very springy and all that, and I'll talk more about that when I get to the writing portion of the video. So this material is literally made of volcano. It's made out of hardened basaltic lava from Mount Etna in Italy. And you can get it in any color you want as long as it's black. It's a very organic material, so it's actually slightly hygroscopic. And what that means is it absorbs and retains moisture from its atmosphere and surrounding environments. So what that means in terms of a pen, it's very similar to ebonite. If you're a fan of ebonite, ebonite's a rubber material, also a natural material. It's going to slightly absorb some of the oils and things like that are on your hand. So when you're holding the pen for a long period of time, it's actually going to grip a little bit better than it would on, say, just a slick plastic. So when you're holding it, it feels very kind of grippy, and it's a little bit warm to the touch as you're holding it. Another nice thing about this material is it's literally made of rock, so it's incredibly durable. But it is a heavy pen, but it's not probably as heavy as you might think it would be. So it's actually kind of a lighter rock than, say, if it was made of, I don't know, granite or something. I don't know. But it's such an unusual material because there's no other pen that's made out of this, but I was kind of pleasantly surprised when holding it how natural, no pun intended, it felt in my hand. So it's available in two different trim colors. There's one that's a bronze, and it's actually a raw bronze, so it has a little bit of a patina to it, which is why Visconti includes that polishing cloth. So if you want to kind of shine it up, you can, or you can just kind of let it go and it'll darken up over time, maybe turn a little black, maybe even a little green as it naturally ages. It is also available in a steel finish, so if you want kind of that just silver colored look, it's not going to patina like that bronze one would. And it comes in two different sizes. There's the regular size, and then there's a midi size as well, which is going to be slightly smaller than the regular size. So in terms of the trim colors, you can get the bronze or the steel in the regular size, but the midi only comes in the steel. So as I'm holding the pen in my hand, it does, like I've said, feel a lot like ebonite. So it's got a really firm grip to it. And holding the grip of the pen, it actually has a slight contour kind of in the middle of the grip. It's very similar, if you're familiar with the Edison Nouveau Premier, similar design to that. So it actually, your fingers kind of tuck in nicely there. Now it does have these threads, which are pretty chunky, I'll call them that. It's because Visconti has something called the hook safe lock threads. And this is a different design than anything you've seen from another pen company because it only has 6 threads in total, and it is really pretty cool. So it's spring loaded in the cap, and it just locks in with a very little bit of a turn. So in order to have that design, they have to have it kind of prominent. So if you're holding the pen in your hand, you're gonna feel those threads just a bit if you hold your fingers a little farther back on the grip. So like I mentioned, this is a kind of a heavy pen. And it is very well balanced though. Now a lot of the weight is in the cap, so when you're using the pen unposted, it actually feels really well balanced as it is. When you post the pen, it tends to throw the balance off a little bit towards the back, because if you notice when it's posted, it sits back fairly far on the pen, so it tends to tip it back a little bit. For that reason, and the fact the pen overall is a little heavier, I personally prefer to leave it unposted. And it's really going to be kind of a personal preference thing. I have larger hands and it fits really nicely in my hand. It feels really good when it's unposted. And my wife uses the smaller one, the midi size, and she feels the same way about this pen in her hand. She likes to use it unposted and it feels really well balanced to her. So on the larger size, the regular pen, the overall weight is 42 grams, which is pretty heavy. Now, 26 grams of that is going to be in the body of the pen, and 16 grams of that is going to be in the cap. So if you're using just the body of the pen, it's actually not that bad. It's when you're posting it that it's going to seem really heavy. Now the midi size, the smaller one, is going to be 37 grams overall, so it's saving you a little bit. 23 grams in the body and 14 in the cap. But it's going to be the same kind of thing. You probably are going to want to use it unposted. Now, pens that are comparable to this in weight, there aren't a whole lot of them actually. The Jinhao pens like the X450 or X750, not that it's really on the same caliber, but you may be familiar with that pen. That's about the size, the weight that it's going to be, or maybe a Monteverde Invincia if you're familiar with that one. That's a similar weight. Now the nib on the Homo Sapiens is really kind of one of the best things about it. This 23 karat Palladium Dream Touch nib is pretty aptly named because it tends to be most people's favorite nibs. I mean, it's an expensive pen. The nib is very nice. That's part of what you're getting when you get this pen. Now, the steel finish on the pen comes with an all steel colored nib. And the bronze one comes with a two-tone nib, so it's a gold and steel color. And I think both look really, really attractive. The nib itself has the Visconti name and some flourishing around it. It looks really, really nice on the surface of the nib. It's just a very attractive, large nib that you're getting. It's not exactly a number 6 size nib, but it's in that range of size for the larger size of the Homo Sapiens. The midi size has a little bit smaller nib, but the design on it is going to be the same. So on the midi size, the smaller one, you really have 3 nib options. You have a fine, medium, and broad. And we're actually not carrying the broad at gouletpens.com. It's going to be a special order only, but we're going to stock the fine and the medium. On the larger size, the regular one, you have an extra fine, fine, medium, broad, and a 1.3 millimeter italic, which really writes more like a stub. It's going to be the same situation on this pen with the broad. We're going to take it only by special order at gouletpens.com. And I will say that all of these nibs write very wet. It's got a very generous flowing feed. The nibs themselves are very springy, so they can get a little bit of flexibility to them when you write. And they are just extremely, extremely wet. So they use a lot of ink, and they're going to flow very generously. So if you like that feel, you're going to absolutely love these nibs. Now let's talk about the filling mechanisms on these pens, because there's actually 2 different filling mechanisms depending on which size pen you're getting. Let's start out with the midi size. The midi size uses a piston filling mechanism. And if you're not familiar with what that is, it's similar to a cartridge converter. It's just a converter that's essentially built into the pen. So it's a piston that slides up and down when you turn the knob on the back of the pen. And then it uses the body of the pen itself to fill up with ink. Now the ink capacity on this pen is not as large as a lot of other piston filling pens out there. It's only about a 1 milliliter ink capacity, which is not that much greater than most cartridge converter pens. So the combination of a really wet writing nib with a piston that's not that large, you're going to be filling this pen a little more often than you may expect. Now that said, the other size, the regular one, comes with a vacuum filler. And if you're familiar, the TWSBI VAC 700 or the Pilot Custom 823 are some popular vacuum filling pens that we've been carrying at gouletpens.com for a while. And the way that this works is you unscrew the back. Visconti calls this their power filler, by the way. But the design is similar to other vacuum fillers you've seen. So you unscrew the knob in the back, you pull the plunger up like this, and it has all titanium components on the inside to avoid rust and corrosion, things like that. You put it down into your ink, you push down, it creates negative pressure inside the pen, and then when it drops off at the last second, it causes the ink to rush into the pen. So it kind of just rushes in there at the last minute. Now, because it's not translucent or anything, you can't really see how good of a fill you've done. So I always recommend doing it a couple of times in your ink to make sure that you're getting a full filling. But that is essentially how the power filler works. And the ink capacity on this one is going to be about 1.5 milliliters. So it's going to be a little more what you would expect with your traditional kind of higher volume filling pens such as piston fillers. So the regular size one, this power filler, it's got the same ink capacity as a Montblanc 149. It has slightly less ink capacity than a Omas Ogiva, and it has more than a Lamy 2000, just to kind of give you an idea of where it fits in. So here I'm writing with the Homo Sapiens in the regular size, which has a larger nib. This is the 23 karat Palladium nib, and this is the extra fine. And this nib is very, very wet. So even though it's extra fine, it's not going to be as extra fine as pretty much most other extra fine nibs would be, whether it's Japanese or European. It's going to be a very, very wet nib. So if you are looking for something as fine as possible, go with the extra fine, but still realize that it's going to be pretty broad. It's going to be more similar to a fine, perhaps even a medium in some other fountain pen nibs, coming from other pen companies. So just kind of be aware of that. But if you like really wet, really smooth flowing nibs, this is going to be fantastic. Even though it's an extra fine, it's really smooth. So it doesn't have some of that kind of scratchiness that a normal extra fine would, probably because it's not ground quite as fine. But it feels fantastic. It's very springy. You can even get some good line variation with it. Not that I would recommend necessarily doing that all the time, because you don't want to wear out the nib, and it's not necessarily like a flex nib. It's not something I would call a flex nib, but it definitely has some variation there. And it's really springy, so as you're writing with it, it's going to act kind of like a shock absorber on your car, so that it's smoothing out some of the bumpiness or some of the inconsistencies of pressure you may have with your hand. So it's going to feel even that much smoother because of how springy it is. So when I'm comparing the Homo Sapiens regular size extra fine to a Lamy All-Star extra fine, it's just the typical Lamy extra fine steel nib that you can get on a lot of different Lamy pens. Definitely the Visconti feels a lot softer. It's way wetter. You can tell even with this very saturated Noodler's black that the black is actually darker with the Visconti because it's just putting more ink down on the page. But it does look broader. I mean, it's going to look more like a Lamy fine, maybe even a medium, depending on how much writing pressure you're using. So if you want to get the finest nib possible, this pen probably may not be the best choice for you, but it is certainly going to feel good. Now, the largest nib that you can get on the Homo Sapiens is the 1.3 millimeter stub. They call it an italic, but it's really a stub. It's very smooth around the edges. You do get good line variation going on the cross-stroke and downstroke, but the edges are very rounded. It writes very smoothly. It's basically a stub. Very generous ink flow. You do still, even on this stub, you can get some line variation depending on the pressure that you put down on it. Not necessarily something that was probably going to be worth your while because you're not going to notice that much of a difference, but it goes more just to show you how springy this nib really is. So even for a stub like this, it feels really smooth as you're writing with it. So now I'm using the midi size. This is a medium nib, so kind of middle of the road here. It's still very wet though. It's going to be as wet as probably most broad nibs on most other pens. So I would say if you're trying to go for a normal pen, if you want to call it that, go with the fine nib on the midi size. It'll probably be a kind of better all-around nib for you, unless you're really looking for a gusher. The flow is really smooth. The nib feels fantastic. The nib sizes I find to be very similar between the midi size and the regular size, even though it's actually two completely different nibs. I find that they write very similarly. They feel similar, and they're going to write in a similar line width for each of the sizes that there are available for both of those pens. So let's talk about the cap now. I mentioned earlier that there's this something called the hook safe lock, and this is a very interesting aspect of this pen because it's something that Visconti has on several of their pens, but it is unique to their design. So if you look, it has these kind of interesting, hook-like threads, I guess. I don't really know how to explain it better than that, but it's got a spring that's built into the cap. And so when you have the pen in your hand, you just push on it a little bit, give it a little bit of a twist, and then let it go, and it'll kind of lock into place. And that is to keep it from coming out unintentionally while it's in your pocket, so it kind of locks it in place. It also makes it so that you only have to do 1/6 of a rotation of the pen to uncap it. So it's really nice. Sometimes when you have threaded pens, you gotta twist and do 1.5 or 2 rotations of the pen. This one is very easy, very pleasant to just kind of cap and uncap. Not gonna lie, a lot of times when I'm in meetings, I just sit here and do this over and over again because it's kind of fun to do. The center band has the word Homo Sapiens inscribed into it on both the steel and the bronze one. It's a little more prominent on the bronze one, I'll say, but it is on both versions. The clip is Visconti's kind of signature clip. They call it their bridge clip. It's designed after the Ponte Vecchio bridge in Florence, and it's a spring clip as well, so it makes it very easy to kind of put it over a shirt or a pocket with a thick material. And one interesting thing about this clip is it doesn't have a ball on the end of it or anything like that, so you can't really just kind of slide it into your pocket. So there's kind of a technique that I find helpful. I don't have a shirt with a pocket today, but I'll try to demonstrate anyway. So when you're putting this pen in your pocket, if you grab the clip with your fingers and kind of squeeze it a little bit so that your fingers are putting pressure on the pen, it pulls away and creates a little bit of gap on the clip itself. And then you can just take and slide it into your pocket, and then you just let it go, and it'll hold on to there. So it's a very kind of smooth action once you get used to it if you're holding it by that clip. And then there's also the Visconti logo in the finial of the pen. And sometimes it may seem a little bit off to the side, and that's because it's actually attached to a magnet that's in the top of the pen. And this is a big part of Visconti's, what they call their My Pen system. So I have this little magnet. This is the Visconti My Pen magnet, and this magnet, you can use really any strong magnet that you want, but it just pulls that little medallion out of the top there. And you can just kind of put it back in place, move it around as you want. But if you use a magnet to pull it out, you can actually replace it with these little jewels that Visconti sells separately. So I've grabbed a tiger's eye jewel in here, and I'm going to put that in the top. This probably match better maybe on the bronze one, but even still, it just shows you there's several different jewel tones that you can get in the top, and it just allows you to kind of personalize your pen a little bit beyond just having the Visconti logo in the top. Now let's talk about price. Now this is a pretty amazing pen, and harvesting rock out of volcano is not exactly an easy thing to do. And these nibs are expensive, and so you're going to pay what it costs to manufacture a pen of this quality. So there's different prices for the two pens. The full size one is going to be $695 MSRP, and the midi size is going to be $550 MSRP. Now, we are authorized Visconti retailers, and so we advertise full MSRP, just as all Visconti retailers do. If you want to, though, on some of our Visconti products, we're able to sometimes offer a better price when you add it into your cart. So I encourage you to go check that out and see if it is something that you're interested in doing. So you can check out more technical information, photos, reviews, and things like that on gouletpens.com. So I'd encourage you to jump over there and check it out a little bit more if the Homo Sapiens is a pen that is of interest to you. If you have any questions about it, be sure to leave comments on the YouTube or on the blog, and be happy to answer them to the best of our abilities. Thanks so much for watching this, and if you like this video and you want more like it, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here. Thanks so much for watching, and right on.